Okay, we are live on Facebook and now we are live on Zoom.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is our first ever Student Services Forum. And as everyone is aware, the school committee has tried to cast a brighter light on our Student Services Department in recent years, especially since Mr. Sawanka has taken over the department. And in doing so, there have been a number of initiatives, but probably the most visible is the fact that we have our Director of Student Services at every other school committee meeting to ensure that the community at large is aware of any happenings, but also that data is being shared, that we're increasing transparency around the realm of student services. This forum is the product of a school committee goal. So it's a school committee event, though not a school committee meeting. We have posted it just so that we can take care of any open meeting law issues so that we can all be together here and discuss these issues at the same time. But it's not a school committee meeting. This is designed to be a public forum so that we can encourage some open discourse to hear about areas that we may be able or ways we may be able to improve the student services offerings, but also hear about things that we're doing right so that we can maybe replicate or emulate that in other facets of the student services department. Our expectation is that I'm gonna turn the meeting over to Dr. Sullivan in a minute, and he will introduce the agenda and our presenters. And I believe that we're going to have a presentation from our Cpac, and I think our representatives are the chair and vice chair, or president and vice president. I'm not sure how you guys structure your hierarchy there, but Tara Valongas and Casimir, and one or both of them will be presenting for Cpac, and then Mr. Sawanka will present on behalf of the district, and then we'll open it up. And we want everyone to participate. So if you're in the audience in person, thank you for being here in person. Hopefully we have some individuals. Dr. Scollins, can you see the participators? If anyone's attending online?
Yep.
So, okay, so we have some attendees. Okay, good. So if you're at home, feel free to chime in. This is designed to be an open forum, so please ask questions. It's the first time. So let's approach this with an open mind, and we will hopefully turn this into at least an annual event where we are focusing on having an open discussion about sort of a year-end review about student services, what can be improved. But let's just keep an open mind and understand that this is the first time we've done something like this. So it's not going to be perfect the first time around. Also,
It's got to be perfect.
Let's maintain, make sure that we're maintaining confidentiality whenever we need to, okay? That we have to do that. So we want to keep the discourse targeted towards generalities and sort of general facets of the programs, especially in terms of special education. So let's try and steer away from any family or family specific or anecdotal accounts or questions whenever possible, because the district will not be able to comment on any specific, family specific issues because of confidentiality issues. Lastly, I believe that we will be able to have a valuable and constructive and productive conversation in 2 hours, but I wish I could do this at school committee meetings. I'm going to set a time of 8 o'clock for a maximum time. So we will stop at 8 o'clock no matter what. Maybe we will stop before that, I don't know, but 8 o'clock will be the latest that we go for this meeting, okay? So all that being said, happy we're here. I'm turning it over to Dr. Sullivan. Yes?
Because we have a quorum, do we not have to call to order?
No, because it's not a meeting. It's just
The notice did call it a meeting.
the notice what?
The notice that went out called it a meeting.
I think when you're together like this, it can't be anything but a meeting.
I think like when we went and we're on the select board
Okay.
Zoom, we had to do.
Okay, well, why don't we do this?
Just a couple.
Why don't we do this?
themselves.
Just do it,
Yeah.
okay? No one's gonna be angry at us for doing too much. So why don't we call to order the first Student Services Forum, and all the school committee members that are present could indicate so in roll call, and now you have been promoted to the first alphabetical order member
Yes.
with Mrs. Fleury's
Think this
departure.
car is gonna jump.
Although he's gonna take that. It's my wish. Well, you can, sir. You can dial.
What does Ashley always say? Present.
Okay, yes. Mr. Kearney.
Present.
Mrs. St. Ange,
Present.
and I am present. Craig McClellan. That is 4 out of currently 4 members because Mrs. Cleary is no longer a member. So we have a 4-person school committee for a very short period of time. Okay, so Mrs. St. Ange, you good with that?
I am,
All right.
thank you.
All right. Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair McClellan. And I just want to remind folks at home that you do need to use Zoom in order to be able to ask questions and in that regard, just in case you haven't had a chance to be part of a school committee meeting. I want to thank.
Yeah, use the Q&A feature on Zoom. Sorry, I always
Yeah.
say that before the school committee.
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah.
I suppose people would understand that. So there's a Q&A feature on Zoom that you can utilize to be able to type responses. And Dr. Scollins, I think, is monitoring them,
Yeah.
and we'll be able to bring you into the mix. Sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
that's good. And we're also
I should've
streaming
said
live
that.
on Facebook, so I don't want people on Facebook thinking they could, where I ask a question, because you won't, you might not, you can ask questions, we won't necessarily see it because we're not monitoring. But I will, in a moment, I know I'll turn it over to our Director of Student Services, who will introduce our guests, but I want to thank our guests for being here. And also just say how valuable I think these types of formats are, because we're able to hear input from the community, which is crucial to moving forward in a productive way in a school district in every regard. You'll note that when we bring in our principals to talk about their school improvement plans, all of the principals have put out surveys to the communities, gathering feedback on how they can better address the needs of families. So this is right in line with that. So I just want to say that at the outset, that it's really valuable. Just a reminder, we are still a rather new team, believe it or not. It feels like we've dealt with so many major issues that sometimes it feels like as a leadership team, we've been here for like 15 years, or maybe that's just me who feels that way.
Doctors.
In a good way, yeah. But it is, we are new. So we've been together for, this is going on our 3rd year, and 2 of the years were rather atypical, shall I say. So this is a nice format for what we may have done at the end of our 1st year. I think it sets a nice foundation for what we can do moving forward to gather input and to make sure we're moving forward as a community and that there's no breakdown in that way. So this is with all that, having said all that, I will turn it over to our Director of Student Services, and I want to thank her for all the great work that her and her staff have done, and also Cpac for your phenomenal support and what you provide for the community too. Thank you for that. So I'll turn it over to Barbara, and I look forward to a great discussion and presentation. Barbara.
So welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Sawanka, the Director of Student Services. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight, to have all of you here. This is a great brainchild of the school committee. We're very excited to be able to host this. I think it's really important because I think a lot of times people look on our website or they reach out to us and they're like, I didn't know who to call, so I called Student Services. So I think it's really great to be able to kind of have this forum and talk a little bit about who we are and what we do. And you know what, 9.9 times out of 10, calling Student Services is the right place to call. So that's always great. But hopefully this will be really kind of informative to people in terms of some clarity around who we are and what we do. One of the wonderful things that we do is we partner with our Special Education Parent Advisory Committee and do work on behalf of families and special education. And we really want to highlight that and get some more involvement and participation in that. So we're really going to start this forum with hearing from Cpac, who they are and what they do, and some of the information that they have heard from families that we are taking into account. I am present at all of the Cpac meetings and always really, value kind of the input that we get through that, but would value more participation in that and welcome people joining that. And then after we hear from them, I'll be talking a little bit about student services as a whole. But without further ado, I would like to turn it over to President Tara Valungas and Vice President Cassie Muir to hear from them.
Thank you for having us and for starting this forum. Tara Valungas is the president this year, serving as the president, and I've been serving as the vice president. And we just really wanted to go through an overview of Cpac. And I say Cpac, and we've already mentioned it, but I think the world of special education is made up of acronyms. So especially the school committee members who are not involved in the SPED world, if you hear anything tonight that is an acronym, I would encourage you to just ask what it means, because I'm sure there are other people listening who don't know what it means. It is a language within itself. Do you agree?
Absolutely. So Cpac is Special Education Parent Advisory Council.
And who is Cpac? So just to start this scene, we didn't create this organization. It's actually an initiative of the state of Massachusetts. It was a law that was established in 1986 that all public school districts need to establish a Special Education Parent Advisory Council. And the purpose of this council is what we are doing tonight, to aid in the planning, development, and evaluation of the school's special education programs, and also to advise the district on matters of education and safety of students with disabilities. Cpac membership is open to all families in the district. If your child qualifies for an IEP or a 504, you are automatically a member of Cpac. However, however,
So an
doesn't.
Yeah, what is IEP?
I was gonna say IEP, Individual Education Plan, and a 504 is accommodation plan. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
It's not.
Another acronym. So this is one area of specific instance that if your child qualifies for an IEP or a 504, you become a member of Cpac. However, you are not actually registered for any events or details about the meeting. So if anyone is listening or is not involved, there is an email address right there on the website. You do actually need to sign up in order to receive the information. And there's an opportunity there as to how we market that, perhaps for more families to gain involvement before their child may actually qualify. But Cpac, we sponsor meetings on a monthly basis, parent meetups for parents to meet and talk about their concerns and their successes. And all events are open to the public. We're also working on a series of speaker coming in to Deer Hill.
Well, yes, we have a speaker coming to Deer Hill on June 3rd, an author who is autistic. And he's going to talk to the kids, all the kids, the whole school about that, which I think is great. And then we have a presentation 24th, May 24th on mediation. And that's for the Cpac, the adults.
Yes, another acronym, the FCA. So just to set the stage, who's in our district? I know Mrs. Sawanka is going to talk a little bit about this. I just put the data in a different format for people to digest. We all know our student population is about 1,400 students. The last time the statistics were published for special education in April of 2021, about a year ago, we had 203 special education students in our district. So that's 203 out of the 1,400 approximately. And then we had 23 students OOD out of district. We had a rate of about 15% of all of our students on IEPs at that point, and we'll hear what it is now. The state average for districts is 17.7%. So this graph also shows the qualifying categories of disabilities for IEPs. The one takeaway here is we just want to look to see, what the makeup is of our audience and students who have challenges. We can see that the largest population here are SLDs, another acronym standing for specific learning disability. So those are the likes of the foundational skills that students need, such as reading, writing, math, and are not seen. They are intellectual disabilities.
Like
Dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia are some examples. So Mrs. Sawanka asked that we provide a bit of parent perspective on the IEP process. Part of the opportunities that we have had as a group this year through parent coffees and meetings is to hear what people are saying in the community about their experiences with special education. And so we thought it prudent to share this. It almost feels that there are novice parents who are not new to the district, but are new to special education. And the process assumes that once your child qualifies for special education, it's all kind of fixed. But we also hear from a lot of experienced parents in this special education process who have a different experience because they tell you that initially they thought it was fixed, but they're actually now having to work a bit more on the advocacy and climbing that hill with their child and the challenges at hand. So this forum is the perfect opportunity to talk about those and maybe parents' different experiences. The one thing I wanted to mention in particular about something we hear from new families to SPED often is the size of this district. It is a small district, which makes it great. But when there is any kind of concern or an issue, it's very difficult to speak up because there's a lot of attention, and especially in special education, it's a very personal situation with a child who has a unique set of circumstances. Therefore, revealing too much information becomes very personal, which is what we don't want to happen tonight, but it is part of that process. So it's something worth noting that we do hear feedback on that. And the other side of the spectrum with the experienced parents, something I just want to highlight is in order for children to qualify for IEPs, there's a team of educators and parents who make these decisions together. Over time, the student may change schools, so that team may change from a school perspective, but the one constant on that team is the parent. So parents really have the most intimate knowledge of this student and that situation, and I think that's an important point to note, especially in the experienced parent feedback. Because we are talking about room for improvement and growth today, I think it's only natural that we look at Cpac as an organization and look for areas of growth and improvement. Through some of the surveys that the district has engaged in with DESE and the reading survey, I have always taken an opportunity to say, from a Cpac perspective, what do you see as an opportunity for growth for our district? Because we are an organization that is here, and some good things have come out of that. One of the consultants mentioned a peer-to-peer mentoring idea where parents who are experienced with this process may be able to mentor other families and actually attend IEP meetings with them. Now, the catch being, as I mentioned, you have to sign up for Cpac, and that normally happens after your child has qualified in the IEP process. So how do we make that connection before families are in that process and really need that guidance at that point to understand the lingo, the lay of the land, what they're looking at?
Actually, I do have a thought about
Yeah.
that, and I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
Once a student is undergoing an initial evaluation, they are under the umbrella of special education. So they can be at the very beginning of that process and engage with you about this.
They need to be
So-
told about us.
Yes.
Yes, yes. But, you know, through this forum and through some of your outreach to parents, if you can make that clear and kind of highlight that a little bit, think about them being at the very beginning of that 45-day process and already engaging with you and therefore kind of partnering with you before that meeting.
However, when consent to test is sent home, can like a Cpac flyer or a half-page something be sent home with it?
So actually, we do have flyers that go out that are Cpac flyers that we instituted at least maybe even a little bit over a year ago.
Yeah, we've had them.
Yeah,
But does it go home with consent to test paperwork?
I believe that it does. I don't think it just goes home with the IEP. I believe that it goes home with our
I'd just be
paperwork.
curious.
But it's a really good question. I'm going
Yeah.
to check on that.
As
to
parent
remind
receives a lot of
myself.
flyers, it should probably be a neon color.
Yeah, the parental green.
Yes. Some that floats.
They are public.
One other area that one of the consultants mentioned was, and this is, it was more of a state comment, that initially the state of Massachusetts did try and pass legislation to have a school committee representative on every, or sorry, a Cpac representative on every school committee. It did not pass, but she saw that as one area for improvement because it is such an integral part of the community here. As we just talked about engagement with more families really proactively, and then also providing more feedback on advocacy and data monitoring, which we will talk about.
And Craig has been coming to our meetings.
Yes, thank you, Carol.
We have, it's been great this year.
Not as many as I'd like. I don't always get to go to them, but
You can't be everywhere.
You want me to give comments as the presentation or wait till after?
let's just, yeah, I wanna,
Yeah,
I have things I was thinking too, but I'd like to let you
Sure.
get to your thing first.
So really, the primary area of concern that we have heard from parents this year through Cpac has been about identification of children with disabilities in our district being too late for key intervention to take place. So that's a theme that we've heard repeatedly, we've shared with Mrs. Sawanka, and really just want to highlight. How does that affect school committee members? So there is a federal IDEA, again, another acronym, Individuals with Disability Education Act, and also a Massachusetts state law called Child Find. What does that mean? It means, as it says there, districts must proactively identify students, locate and evaluate all children with disabilities, regardless of the severity of their disabilities. This obligation to identify all children who may need special education services exists even if the school is not providing special education services to the child. So it has been wonderful to have the updates on a monthly basis now at the school committee meetings, because we can see where these referrals are coming from, how many are happening, and that's new information, which is great. How does that then further impact school committee? Well, it looks at the budget, really. I have this graph up here called the Matthew effect. It's looking at readers who are between the ages of 8 to 13. Probably seen a graph like this before. They've done it with wealth, with different things, but this is the gap caused by the lack of reading intervention at key ages. So when a child hits 3rd grade, something happens. They're either off reading and they're improving here at a much faster pace, or the poor readers are improving at a much slower pace. So from a planning perspective, we need to look at how many children are we identifying and when are we identifying them, so that the intervention we're providing is most impactful for the student at hand and also cost effective for the district, so that we're not providing intervention for that wider gap later on. State of Massachusetts has put in some guidelines to help with identifying some of these things. 2018, the dyslexia state guidelines came into effect. I think we'll hear how many students we've screened this year as a district and how many we found. So there are good areas of framework that have been set up to help districts like us, well, all districts, try and identify as many students early on as possible. With that, just to illustrate it again in a different way and bring it into our district, this would be really helpful information to look at on a case study for our district to see. The top graph up there is from Decoding Dyslexia, Massachusetts. And basically you have pre-K, K through 2, which is your primary time for intervention relating to SLD, specific learning disability, which we saw was the largest area of disability here in our district and nationally as well. So that is the prime area for key intervention. But what you're seeing is the time we get to 7th grade, the number of students on IEPs specifically for SLDs has actually just shot up. But we're past the window of intervention. So back to that previous slide, that's the Matthew effect. Our gap is much wider and harder to remediate versus when it's earlier on there and we can catch them and remediate there. How does this then tie into Child Find and to our own district? So I just flipped the numbers from Mrs. Sawanka's presentation to see it in a graph format. We have had this year from September to March, 44 students referred for special education evaluations, which is great. 28 out of those 44 have been found eligible. The source of those referrals, 70% are coming from the parents and 30% are coming from the school, MTSS, the multi-tiered system of supports. So if we look at that as a district, I think there's an opportunity here to evaluate how we really implement opportunities to find all of the kids who are here through the system. And just to end on this, there is a gentleman, he is a school board member out in Palo Alto, California, and he's been on the literacy circuit this year. He is like many of you around the table, school committee members, he is a businessman, and he came into the school district in California, which is a very affluent Uber school district, very much like this one. And he started looking at the numbers and the literacy in their district because he saw that their standardized scores were good, but he just wanted to dig into the data a bit more. And what he found was exactly what we're talking about here. We can't call ourselves a great school district unless we get great results for the least resourced and most challenged students. And here in Cohasset, that is the population we are talking about tonight within special education, those who face the most learning challenges. We hear the school committee talk about wanting to be on the crest of the wave. And I guess these are the questions of how do we know where we are on that wave? How do we compare this year to last year, which is what we're going to hear about? How do we monitor to see if we're moving forward? What is the future view of special education and how is that being communicated to parents? And which districts excel at special education? Do we know? And what makes them great? And how do we compare then as a district in that regard? So that's, I think, the perspective from Cpac. And thank you, Barbara, for the time. We will turn it over to you for the, do you
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any, I mean, before we move on to Mr. Sawanka's, does anyone have any, including anyone here, anyone have any questions for Cpac or any comments? Anyone online?
I have one comment.
Great.
Now, just for protocol purposes, do people need to give their address or?
Well, I suppose in line with what Mrs. St. Ange mentioned earlier, why don't we just do that? And we can just, if they haven't, we can just tell them later to do that.
Yeah, so we have Carrie, and Carrie, if you want to add your address in, that would be terrific, your full name. There is a comment that says, yes, there needs to be more information regarding Cpac for us to gain access to this.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Cpac? I had a question about, so I know Cassie, you and, well, I guess I should keep in line with the tradition of using last names, because if any students are, so Mira, I guess
They
you,
must not know.
you and I have spoke in the past about, like very recently, we were talking about how it would, it's like, people have tried to make it mandatory, but it would be ideal to have a special education parent on the school committee all the time. And we had that up until fairly recently. Obviously, where we don't even have the requisite number of people that want to run for school committee in town, it's difficult to get into qualifications of those people. But I was thinking, because I really want that, I was thinking, and I don't know if like people would have the time, but what if we had, like you saw like the student representatives we had that come to regular meetings, and I wonder if like Cpac would be a good resource to find parents that might be on like a circuit that might be willing to come, like, you know, maybe there's like 5 of you or something, you just switch off on meetings so no one's having to come every other Wednesday, but we have a standing like group of Cpac parents that come that are at the table so that when these things come up, like maybe that would be something that we could talk about. I don't know, maybe that seems like that would be like a good solution.
Sure. There was
So, like,
actually just a discussion on this on the regional Cpac page today, talking about how districts are handling that.
Okay.
And I think you can see that Hanover's dealing, they have somebody coming and reporting somewhat regularly. So I think there's opportunity out there to look at.
I think we usually have one of us on school committees, but yes, I think we're having like, you're
But
saying.
I mean,
come
here,
to,
like, you get a little sign, you know, and everything, like, here, you know, I think it would be important to have, so let's just, I'm not
I like
saying we
it.
need to start it tomorrow, I'm just saying, let's talk about that offline, just a thought I had. I know, Dr. Collins, you had some, did you have some comment? Oh, you were asking me about the comments that were coming in with Q&A.
Correct. I do
Okay,
have another comment.
you do,
I do.
Great.
So, Jeannie Leclerc, and if you could give me your address, that would be helpful. And Ms. Leclerc's comment is excellent presentation. We do need to test earlier before third grade to help narrow that gap. What are they doing for testing between K2?
So certainly testing does go on between K2. This, as many of the things that Tara and Cassie presented in their presentation, these are, items we've talked about before. These are focus areas for the district. They're focus areas for Dr. Scollins in curriculum and assessment, for myself in student services. Certainly, initial evaluations and testing does go on in grades K2. Is this a continuing area of focus for us? Because would we like some more of that heavy identification that Cassie was referring to that goes on in grades 3, grades 4, grade 5 to come down to grade 2 and some of those other areas? Yes, we would. There's a lot that goes into it. There's, the growing MTSS that we're going to talk about in my presentation. There's those specific strategies. There's kind of the growing reading curriculum that's going on. And then along the lines with that too, is the special education identification process and the testing for that. And
then our gen ed diagnostic, if you don't mind jumping in,
please
sorry.
do.
But gen ed diagnostics too, looking at what are we doing for assessments. We added iReady this year, which lots of districts are using, that has a dyslexia screener, and it's actually our first K through 8 diagnostic that we have for ELA and math. And so that's helpful. And we're also looking at what are we assessing, what are the instruments we're using, and which ones are duplicated now that we've added iReady. We actually didn't take anything away. We may have a little over-assessed a little bit this year, but we really want to take anything away until we knew exactly what it is that new assessment.
So do we know how many kids were picked up, for instance, through the dyslexia screener? Like, have you been able to chart to say we were able to identify 30% in this grade, 5% in this grade, and 10% in that grade? Or how is that being tracked?
No, we have not done that yet. We do have some tracking going on through it's our school psychologists here who do our testing. It's not just the dyslexia screener through Shavix that we're using, but as Dr. Scollins said, there's some dyslexia highlights in the iReady.
Right. And
There's also a
eight.
couple of other screeners and assessments that Allison Doyle uses in terms of dyslexia. She is looking at, who has she tested so far this year? How many has she tested? Really, my June school committee meeting is kind of my end of the year report. This one is really kind of on student services as a whole. So there are going to be some more numbers crunching that comes out at that in terms of what are we seeing and how are we continuing to move forward in this new area for us.
Perhaps in the future that we could tie that in, the end of the year report, with the student service forum, because I think it might be a
There you
nice,
go.
Yeah.
Another way that we
it'd
can
be a
improve
really
this.
nice
then.
connection
Yeah.
with
Think about
that.
this.
So
Yeah,
you can get, just so you can get all the data. We have.
yes, that would make sense.
Right.
So just regarding though, the district's implementation of the Massachusetts dyslexia screener, for instance. So how are parents being notified if their child was flagged?
So the reading specialist would reach out and let them know if that was happening.
And they would say that your child's been screened for, or your child has been flagged for possible dyslexia. We're going to go ahead. So we know then that, I guess, does that then tie into the numbers that Mrs. Sawanka's reporting on monthly? Like,
We haven't-
would those be MTSS referrals? Or is it a separate
Right, I guess I would,
testing?
yeah, I don't have those numbers, like I said, we're gonna look at them at the end of the year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think at this juncture, with the new testing that's going on, it's a little premature to say that that's a direct correlation. We have to look at it at the end of the year and see what did we see in the fall testing, what did we see in the spring testing, what did we see in the screeners? How is this kind of affecting these numbers, kind of a little bit in retrospect, and then kind of continue to build on that and plan accordingly.
I guess who's the one who would look at the numbers and compare? Is it the teacher, the general ed teachers?
In terms of what number?
The scores that come back, like who's the one saying, oh, this one's a little low, we might want to look at the student?
So,
Everybody.
yeah, so principals, reading specialists, math specialists,
Okay.
the teachers, and that's part of their building base. teams that look together, but those are things that we're working on too, really looking at our data teams, what's our district data team, and what are the building-based data teams. It's all happening, but we want to make that more consistent. Yeah, it's a great question.
So just to finalize that though, there is no letter, I'm guessing, that is going out to all families about the dyslexia screener then, that the state implemented? That they've said all students need to be screened for the dyslexia guidelines this year? So what, because I know a lot of districts are proactively sending a letter saying we've screened your child for, this new legal recommendation. We are expecting that your child passed or your child might need to be flagged for more immediate concern. And the question is, I guess, is how are parents being notified if their child, are we waiting until the end of the school year to look at the 3 sets of numbers?
No, if they showed up, then the reading specialist contacted the school.
Right.
Psychologist would have contacted that parent about this. Right, but you're right, I think.
But that initial general letter is good.
Yeah, you read the general letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to see,
Yeah.
given that we know what 15 to 20% of the population is dyslexic, we would hope that we're at least getting 15 to 20% of all of our students then flagged, right? Every year.
Nice. All right. Should we get into your presentation, Mr. Sawanka?
If there are no other questions, Dr.
There are
Scott.
no questions, sir.
Dr. Stone, anything coming from online attendees?
No, that's it. Yeah, just
Oh.
letting,
Thank you.
yeah, she sent the. her
Anyone
address. Thank you, Mr.
On any
Blair.
issues for Cpac at all? Or is everyone comfortable moving on? Okay, good. All right, so
Are we limiting comments to 2 or 3 per household, or can people feel free to say things out
not
loud?
in this. Let's see how this goes. This is the first time out. The last thing I want to do is discourage participation in,
You can
yeah.
replace the 2 to 3 comment limit with the 8 time limit maximum.
No, I see.
It's got an 8 o'clock
Right, that's
maximum.
right.
We don't need
Yeah,
a 2 to 3
right,
comment
that's
limit.
right. There you go. There you go.
We're consistent.
All right. So our student services forum, everyone. Very exciting. So some of our beliefs around all students, that every student can learn, just not on the same day or in the same way necessarily. And that's what all of us are really open to as educators, for all of our learners. And that everyone, every learner in our district gets what they need. That is, it's our belief, it's our goal, it's what we strive for, and it is what we plan to do. Ooh, sorry. In terms of the Student Services Office. I'm sorry, I can't believe you need that because now I'm going to go back. I can't do that.
That's not going to work for you.
It isn't.
No, because it's attached to my computer.
Oh.
So, but just the arrow, use the arrows.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Okay, so a big question, which probably isn't showing as well as it could there in my nice spring yellow color. What is student services? So certainly student services refers to special education. It probably is the majority of the work that I do as the director of student services kind of falls into the bucket of special education. That is students who are on individualized education programs and receive specialized instruction. However, there are also a lot of other things that fall under student services. Students who are on 504s technically fall under the category of student services. 504s are a building-based plan. However, ultimately, they do fall under the Office of Student Services. And if you have any questions or any concerns around that, certainly we would direct you to your building level first, just as we do in special education. We direct you to kind of your teacher, in special education, your team chair, and 504s to your building principal or your 504 coordinator, and then to me as the director. But parents know I am, always happy to field calls, very open with communication and to answer any questions.
And Ms. Sawanka, just for me and maybe anyone else watching, can you give an 504 learners an accommodation? So can you give examples of the types of things that would be 504s that people should think about that might trigger them to need to reach out on the state?
Absolutely. So in order to qualify for, and we'll get into this a little bit deeper when we get into some of the other slides. In order to qualify for a 504, you do need to have a diagnosed disability. But in order to make effective progress, you need accommodations within your classroom. You do not need changes in terms of modifications of curriculum. But what you might need is you might need some accommodations along the lines of perhaps you need audio text for reading. Perhaps you need
Preferences.
extra time in order to finish projects and tests. Perhaps you might need some graphic organizers in order to do your writing assignments, all of which can take place through simple accommodations through general education. There's a 504 team. They'll work with the family. The family is part of that team to help figure out those accommodations and to make sure that all of the educators and service providers for students are aware and implement them.
And as you said, those plans are building specific.
Yes,
And
So-
they're general education.
they are. Another category that falls under the Office of Student Services is home hospital tutoring. So whether a child is on an IEP, a 504, or no plan whatsoever, if a child is out for an extended period of time and qualifies for home or hospital tutoring, that comes through the building principal first and then through the Office of Student Services to set up that tutoring for that child.
What would be an example of an extended period of time? So are we talking weeks, months? I guess what's the benchmark? When
Usually the
people-
benchmark starts with more than 14 days out.
And then the first touch point there is the building principal, the parents.
How do they qualify for that?
So interestingly, there is what's called a home and hospital tutoring form, which physicians provide to families when they deem that a child is going to be out for an extended period of time. They share that with the family. The family generally then shares that with the building principal, and it comes through my office to set up that tutoring.
And is it the same on the 504? Is the first point of contact is the building
Is
principal?
the building.
Just want to get a roadmap for people who might want to need to engage.
Yes. So another category that falls under student services is the category of civil rights that I share with Dr. Leslie Scollins. And Dr. Scollins and I ensure that all students are fully accessing their civil rights and that there's no violations thereof. But if there are questions or concerns, that can come to us. And also another category that is very building based but falls under student services as a whole are our English language learners. So what's very important to our Office of Student Services is our guiding beliefs and how we connect these to our strategic plan and our compass points. And there are three main guiding beliefs that headline every department meeting agenda that I send out to my special education staff and that we really talk about and in the Office of Student Services. First important one is that process guides practice and therefore guides best outcomes for children. Process is really important because it really does lend us, if you will, Mr. Dial, as you mentioned before, kind of that roadmap and how we get from point A to point B with students and do it in a very thoughtful and meaningful way. And it directly connects to our strategic plan compass point. Number one, teaching and learning, and number two, social emotional wellness, and number three, the resources for our district.
Folks at home can view the entire strategic plan on our website. It's everywhere. So,
Yes.
build with us.
Another important guiding belief for those of us in our district and specifically in the Office of Student Services and Special Education is that we treat children as individuals, but we function as a team. And that is really important to us, that decisions are team decisions and that everyone feels as an equal member of the team. And sometimes that is hard. And sometimes that is hard for families because there's an awful lot of educators at the table. And there are only one or two family members at the table. And it is really important, and it is kind of well noted in the Cpac presentation around things like making families feel like they're on an even playing field and not using acronyms that people are not going to understand and not moving too quickly through things that those of us in the field kind of have as second knowledge, if you will, that, you know, it's just second nature to us. And to really engage and take our time and work together through those things. But that is, you know, truly one of our beliefs. It is something that you can always slow us down on and ask us about that. And it directly ties again to our strategic plan compass points. Number 1, teaching and learning. Number 2, social emotional wellness. And number 4, communication and engagement. And that is vitally important to us.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Do you have like a nonverbal way for families to ask for you to slow down in a meeting? Because sometimes it's awkward to interject, but is there a way to put like a green card or a red card or a yellow card on the table so someone can just like slip it forward and then it's understood? Now we need to put, you're a smart person, you can figure it out, but like a non, you know, you would, I like that. Kids do
And
that.
I think one of the things that has helped us, believe it or not, over the past 2 years, to kind of level that playing field, and actually, Mrs. Singer, I think you and I were talking about it, was the meetings through Zoom. That it's much easier for families to access them. It's kind of, you know, everybody on the Brady Bunch screen, and it feels a little bit more like equal footing and a little bit less intimidating. And I know that families have been really open and positive about us being open to continuing those meetings through Zoom and have felt like they, you know, oftentimes both parents can access them because it's not as much heavy lifting in terms of having to get to a school, if I need a place to park and getting into a room, into the meeting and then getting back again, and whatever that time frame it, you know, entails for families, that to get on a Zoom and participate that way just really cuts down on all of that and really enables everyone to participate in a really meaningful way. So we've really kind of continued that as, you know, a first option for families. We're always willing to meet in person. We even sometimes meet hybrid like we are here tonight. But I think that has been very helpful and beneficial to the team process.
It's a great suggestion. I mean, the whole experience is it's emotional and it's it can be very intimidating and intense. And so it's
You don't want to interrupt when someone's reporting their stuff, but yes.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about the most important thing in your world, and it's a very viscerally hard thing to do. So it's nice to think about ways we can slow it down and not think it's just run of the mill business as usual. And we try to take care of that, but it's really nice to hear that input to try to you know, try to make that happen.
Yeah, it's great. And so finally, and I love this. I heard this in a professional development conference that I went to this year. We have the ability to be a primary resource for our students, our families, and each other. And that is just so powerful to think of ourselves, and we truly are the primary resource for all of these people. Hitting directly on strategic plan compass points number 3, resources, and number 4, community and engagement. And what's helpful about this is that every month in my department meetings, these, as I said, are kind of the head of my department meeting agendas, and it just gives everybody a pause to recenter themselves and to remind ourselves of the important work that we do and what it is that we are there for, and to do it with intentionality. Because we all get so busy. So, our growth mindset, it is really important as a district to recognize the things that we do well, but to always be moving forward, because we can always do all of them better. And that is really our work And in that, I just wanted to highlight some of the initiatives to date in my just scant of 2 years being here that we have done. So we have, I think in July, Dr. Sullivan, when I first came on board.
Yes.
um,
Yeah, I said 3 years and Ms. Swan's only been here too, so, yeah, right.
Hired a second school psychologist at the secondary level to enable both counseling and testing to take place, because that was really a wish of the school psychologist at the secondary level, to be able to tap into both their ability to counsel to students and to test students. So we have both a school psychologist and a school adjustment counselor at the high school, and a school psychologist and a school adjustment counselor at the middle school.
Specific for those buildings.
Yes, and that was an area that we heard as a need and an area for growth, and we're really seeing great results from. Increase in reading support staff at both the elementary and secondary levels that Dr. Scollins could speak a little bit to, because we're looking in the Office of Student Services, not just at special education, but at all students.
And so we will, this year, we added a 0.5 for halftime reading specialist at each elementary school. And then we also added a full-time reading specialist at the middle school level. So, and that's been, we're working through all of those challenges for new programming. So, but it's been very exciting and very helpful to have those additional.
And it's hard to make progress without those additional people, just to put it up. I mean, but you need someone on the ground floor doing the work. So you got to put the pieces in place to get the results. That's what we're trying to do.
So also, thanks to school committee, we had an increase of a special education teacher at the secondary level to address students' needs through a therapeutic lens. Social emotional learning is a real highlight in our district, a real focus for us. We saw a need numbers-wise to increase. This particular year, it was at the 8th grade level. There was a bubble class. As that class moves up to high school, we have that special education teacher moving with them, but we're also now going to be able to look at that population and do some targeted focus in terms of the access to the curriculum for those students being problematic because of some social emotional concerns, and really kind of tease some of that out, refocus some of that population with this teacher, and start building in some more therapeutic supports in a very cohesive way through that. Also at the secondary level, we had the addition this year, again, thanks to school committee, of the addition of a social worker at our secondary level, which is really expanding our Bright program, but our mental health services for all students at the secondary level.
Ms. Sawanka, can you explain what BRIGHT, another acronym, means?
Yes, I'm happy to. So our Bright program has been here in the district for quite a while. It is building resilience for youth in transition. And it is students who are experiencing some difficulties accessing school, attending school for a wide variety of reasons. Some of them may be some mental health challenges. There may be been some hospitalizations. Some of those may have been physical injuries. Some of them may have been for some social emotional concerns. And we have a classroom, a room, I really should say, that we set up that is a re-entry into school for students who are experiencing these difficulties. Our school social worker is tied directly to that. There is a team that is tied directly to that uses the MTSS team to initiate this process, and in a very individualized way, look at what students need in their return, build a safe space for them, and a manageable return to school through very individualized supports with whatever they may need.
Yeah.
And it's really, we expanded it greatly through our original participation and membership within the Bright Consortium at a very basic level to an expanded level this year, and have worked very closely with that consortium in kind of building out our Bright program and we're very happy with the results and the addition of the social worker and what we've been able to provide to students.
It's a great thing to have in a district. I think it started in Brookline, was that correct?
Yes.
And the
Yep.
districts that have it and are using it properly, it serves a real important purpose. So just know it's a really nice thing to have in a district, particularly a small district like this. It's nice.
So other kind of growth mindset initiatives that we've put in place, task forces and trainings in reading, in MTSS, which is ongoing, and I'll speak about a little bit later. And then Dr. Scullins and I will speak a little bit also about data and progress monitoring as we move forward. And then also independent evaluations that we put into place through the district this year. We had an independent evaluation in the area of social emotional concerns and offerings. Just recently in reading, which we're awaiting the final results of, which we are hopeful to have by the end of this month, which will be really nice to help us guide us more in that very important area. And this was an in-district year through our tiered focused monitoring with a lens towards special education and civil rights, and some of those evaluation findings that have come out, which we will also talk about a little bit later in this slideshow.
So we were evaluated in many of the major areas that we're speaking about today, which is nice because again, this is so important for us to get more information on where we can steer this.
Yes, and to get that through a lens of Cpac and parents, to get that
Right.
through a lens of the district, but also to get that in an objective way outside of ourselves to help us move that forward. Really important.
Okay, there's a question in the audience.
Um,
No, in the audience.
oh, in the audience, okay, all right. Sure.
Melissa McDonough, 306 Fair Oaks Lane. Just with what you just mentioned about looking to get CPAC's engagement and the parents, and I know you have up there task forces. My understanding is most of the task forces don't have parent representation on them, and I think that is a big miss. I think in the spirit of this come together, I think we should look at those task forces and trying to take a parent perspective, particularly the parents that are here that are involved, because I think they do have things to contribute and want voices.
Yeah, and that's also all over our strategic plan. Sometimes to get our house in order a little bit with our current staff, and then to bring parents on, and the next step is actually very practicable and functions well. Sometimes you can bring parents in right from the beginning, but having a parent is essential. You know, you need that. So that's something we can absolutely look forward to doing.
And I totally respect your opinion. My issue is with the timing, even with you saying, we're all new here, it's 3 years, that's essentially half of our lower elementary years.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I think even thinking about, well, let's establish this task force, and then let's think about bringing parents in. I think for the parents, the time goes by so quickly that it's the years of the kids that are in school here. So I completely understand process and things take time. Just again, thinking about the parent perspective, that what is immediately relevant to them changes.
We hear that loud, and believe me, we hear that. And it's a matter of looking, first of all, what our needs are. I mentioned having staffing to do some of the things we want to do was primary and huge to us. We didn't even have that. We didn't have a reading specialist at the middle school, for instance. So in order to create that is really important. But I can absolutely appreciate the I won't say frustration, but the urgency to get that done for your sons and daughters. And I will say, we push really hard. Our staff is wonderful and they do great work too. But this is it is absolutely a community effort. So we definitely need to continue to build this, but build it with the community. So it's very well, your point. What's that?
We're free labor, so.
Well, I love that. Thank you.
And what I really appreciate about that too is that, like Dr. Sullivan said, sometimes, depending upon what it is, start the task force kind of, at the school level with the people there, and then you kind of add into it. But sometimes when that happens, we're rolling with it, and you've got this, this group of people, and then you almost forget that that was something that you were going to do. So I really appreciate you, bringing that up again and, making that alive for us. But certainly there are, there's always room to look at it again and say, okay, when should this happen? How should this happen? Let's remember that this has to happen. We've got people here who are anxious and who have good experiences and can really engage with us about this.
And there's training and professional development involved too. So that's just something to remember when we're training our staff and preparing our staff to understand what to do. So that's a big piece of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually just have a quick question. Sorry. Hi, I'm Leah. I was just curious about the reading support person. I think there was an uptick, it's about 0.5% now, 0.5% specialists at the middle school now. Is that correct?
We have a
Halftime?
No, a full-time reading specialist at the middle school. It was
At the
0.5
middle school.
at each elementary school. So we have 1.5 at each of the elementary.
Okay, so there's a full-time reading specialist at the middle school now. So does this person, I'm just curious, work with students who are already identified, or does this person work with all students? I'm just curious about that.
So
The reading support person.
the reading support person. So this person was working with students who were identified as needing support. Sometimes it was because they came up from the elementary school, were already having support, or they were identified through the iReady assessment that we gave. And so that's the beginning stages. It's a brand new position.
Oh, no.
So that's a really great question because the role will expand to even more. But initially, that's what happened this year.
Don't forget, we're adding one in, not your question, your point, but we're adding one in math as well this year. So the idea is that there should be that gap that we can see in some standardized testing, for instance, happening between our 5th grade and our 6th grade, that shouldn't be there. And we should be continuing the support that we have for our students who struggle with reading. And it looks different as they get older. And your point about early intervention is absolutely crucial. But we're providing that now. And we weren't able to do that before. So again, we thank the school committee for that. Big step.
So supports for students. For families to understand, there are kind of, if you will, maybe 3 major areas through which, supports kind of tend to come. One of them is called our District Curriculum Accommodation Plan, our DCAP. This is for all students, all teachers. This is a general education, tier 1 kind of support, and it is just general for everyone. Now, I have to say, this year, what I have done is I have, since December, been meeting with an MTSS task force. It is comprised of some building principals, some reading specialists, some special education staff, general education staff, some team chairs, some within special education staff, some of them are therapists, some of them are teachers, reading and math specialists, myself, Dr. Scullin. It's a diverse group of people from every single level. And what we have been looking at is we have been looking at the vertical alignment of MTSS. So it is a similar experience from grade to grade and from school to school, and that parents have that experience, that transition information goes from grade to grade and school to school, and really putting that into place in terms of vertical alignment, and looking very closely at the Cohasset current DCAP and the accommodations that are in place for every general education teacher to know that, all of this can happen for all students, and really looking at what goes on in those general education classes for all students, and how can we kind of expand this plan, this curriculum accommodation plan, to show all of those things and really be very reflective of Cohasset at every single school, and put that up on our website as it already is, but kind of through this new lens and this updated version. And then from there, kind of build out from DCAP into more work on MTSS, those tiered supports after this tier 1 DCAP plan, and what that looks like, how students access them. When do you go from utilizing these accommodations that can be used from everyone into your classroom to how do I know when I bring a student to MTSS? And what do I look for there? What do I get out of that? How does this continue to roll along? All of that is currently in work in this task force. But just so everyone is aware, there is the Mtss process, which is the very building-based team, those tiered supports that get put in place for students, a time frame within which we kind of analyze and measure the efficacy of those tiered supports. Does it need to continue? Has the student kind of been able to independently make some of those supports their own, and are they ready to go on themselves? And then, do we continue to need to move into the area of perhaps a referral for a 504 or an IEP? The 504, as we talked before, around accommodations, the IEP around really specialized instruction for a student. But just to kind of explain that a little bit, and they all lead to each other and are all interwoven. They don't have to. They sometimes go out of order because that's what's right for students. But just so that everyone is aware of this kind of full picture of student supports that exist. Questions? Ryan?
Could you give an example of the type of accommodation and level in tier 1?
Sure. So like an example of something that might be on a DCAP for tier 1, something like, if students need movement breaks, that they would be able to access and get up and engage in those just through, any student, anytime in a general education classroom, worked out with the student and the teacher and the parent, something like that.
Or maybe a team at the middle school decides to do, post their homework in the same way. Or have, something that's general across a whole team so that everybody benefits from that. Like that would be a tier 1, could be a tier 1. Something's gonna help all students.
Do you, have we studied this as a district to see, we know that, the IEP is about 15% of the district population. Do we know MTSS, what percentage of our students based on elementary, middle, and high school are falling within that bucket? And what is the average? One of the questions we hear a lot from parents at Cpac is, well, I don't have any information. How long are kids in MTSS? You referenced a time frame. So at what point are parents notified? And then how is that shared? The progress.
Right. So at the beginning of this year, a letter went out to all parents around the MTSS process. When students go into MTSS, then it is at that building-based level that parents hear about it. In terms of how long they stay in it and with timeframes and things like that, it's so variable. So for example, some students may go in to MTSS and they may be brought up at a meeting. They may identify some supports that student needs. The students may receive those supports and it varies. In one MTSS meeting for one student, it could be like, we're going to come back in 3 weeks and look at this. For another student, it might be, we're going to come back in 6 weeks and look at this. Usually doesn't go longer than that. Usually it's around 4 to 6 weeks. And then you judge the efficacy of that, the student response to that. Does it need to continue? Is the student able to kind of stop and run with it on their own? And if they need to continue, then that's fine. They just can continue with those supports as long as they are enabling them to make progress. And then if they're not enabling them to make progress, then we need to look at another level of support and look at that for, again, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And that our students kind of able to continue with that, and then they can continue with that level of support. Or do we need to look at, even more than that?
Yeah, I guess that's a question though. Is there like a percentage of students? Do we know how many students fall within that bucket? Because it would be useful probably to understand if we're, allocating resources to those specialists who may be supporting that bucket, are there enough resources there? Or could there be-
MTSS.
MTSS, yes, versus you're looking at IEPs and 504s, you need to know what the audience is there. How many students are we talking about? Are we talking about 1% or 25%? There's a big difference there in how you allocate funding.
Which needs a greater allocation of resources.
Well,
Well, remember, in MTSS, students are moving in and out of.
Exactly. It's
constantly
a much
through
more
it. So
fluid
it's,
process. They
yeah.
don't end up on a plan like a 504 or an IEP, so it's a little harder to kind of get a number. But I have to say, with kind of, some of the work we've done in terms of expanding the reading instructors and kind of expanding, math interventionists.
Right.
Clearly we have worked through MTSS and seen what kids need and kind of moved accordingly.
Right, but to your point, we are going, because I think you have a valid point. Students that are coming through MTSS, we have to track them, right, to see what's happening.
I think a few
And
years
so
ago,
those are,
they did, right? They started to track that with the school committee, I remember. And they were trying to see if people were getting, if there was, like a roadblock, so to speak.
that's interesting. I
So
don't know.
what was
if that
happening?
Yeah.
If
They
students
were-
are kind of in
there
purgatory
was-
through MTSS for too long.
They were, but the problem is obviously, like I said, they move in and out of
Yeah.
levels. And at that time, the district didn't have the understanding that they do now about MTSS and what MTSS is. And there was a lot of questions about what a tier 3 was, for instance. We were just moving along with where our team is and what the district needed in terms of movement and, when we came. So we do not have, if you're looking for raw numbers, but again, raw numbers in MTSS, it would really be how many kids are referred to it and how we move them in that way, because you can't look at particular levels and draw conclusions necessarily because of that, because it's not like you stay in a level, it's based on the need. The idea is to move kids to the point where they succeed and to give them what they need in order to succeed. So it's more tracking that whole.
Yeah, and I think probably to that point, tracking them to see if they're then acquiring the
Sure.
skills, or
Yeah.
as this, reports come through on a
Yeah.
monthly basis, that's the funnel for the evaluations of special education.
Yeah.
So
It's wonderful.
one funnel.
Remember MTSS is a general education.
Right,
So some students may never, ever be referred.
exactly. But it would be useful, I think, to then be able to say, these interventions are working for this specific area, whether it's math or reading at that stage. Otherwise, there's no data to support, the feeling of this is or isn't working.
I think Ms. Bryant had a question.
Hi, Allison Bryan, 44 Hunt Road. Seems to me like families sometimes don't realize that their child has been referred to MTSS, and it would be super helpful, I think, if families for everybody, if families got a form that they could fill out. And because there could be something else that's going on that the school doesn't know about, my family hasn't communicated. But I also think that as a parent, it feels yucky when you know that there have been some concerns about your child and they are brought to this meeting, and you as a parent didn't know that the school had these concerns. So I think that it's a really good time to partner with parents.
Is there not a process, because you mentioned the application, someone to MTSS, do parents not get notified at that point?
Yeah, they've got it.
My understanding is that parents do get notified through the school-based team. But this is a particular focus area, and like I said, I have a task force on it right now. We have a task force on it right now, and an area that we are really working on. One of the things that we are working on is the idea of letters at kind of each level of MTSS, not just one at the beginning of the year, but one at each time, that would both notify and kind of elicit some feedback from families around this and things like that. But, there is a process, I have to say, through our the social emotional and the reading independent evaluation. We really got a lot of compliments on the understanding of the general education staff around MTSS and the work that they're doing on MTSS, and that it is kind of a living organism in each of the schools that is really very active, compared to other districts that, you know, these people have kind of seen, which was great, but it is a targeted area of focus and growth for us in a lot of ways. And I have to say that people who participate in the task force from the school are a very excited and dedicated group of people, and the amount of work and legwork that they do outside of our meetings and the information and the things that they bring to our meetings to move us forward, it's tremendous. It's a privilege to work with them, and it's very exciting to see this develop.
But I think it's building the consistency piece, because each building has been doing it. It's the consistency piece from building to building. One building may, in the past, was giving information one way, another building was giving another. Even when it came to progress monitoring, or even some things that we found just around even providing family reports, right? So there's some, so those are the pieces that are focused in multiple areas for us to look at what's the consistency from grade to grade, building to building, to make sure that it does all align. So those are the processes pieces that we're all working on.
And what makes sense at each building too, when you look at the ages of the students and make it, you know, organically fit and work. Yeah.
So I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I guess Ms. Bryant's question is, it seemed to assume that a student could go into MTSS and the parents would have no idea.
That can't happen.
So that's not.
If it's happening, we need to fix that. That's not an acceptable
Yeah,
practice.
those letters need
So
to
it's
be
good to
simple.
hear that.
That's a very simple thing
But
to
we,
do.
but it is also
It's
something
really
we're working
unacceptable
on.
for parents to not know that. And I've been in that situation. And I know the progress monitoring passages, so when I hear my child mention something from one, I'll say, why are you being progress monitored? It needs to be shared.
Yeah,
Sure.
it absolutely does.
And that was an announcement that we made at the beginning of the year, that the letters were gonna be happening.
And-
So is that at the benchmark? So is that fall, so like October, January, June? Is that like when you would do dibbles? Like that, so like in my job, like
Yes.
as a literacy specialist, when we do our benchmark testing, and we pick up a new group of kids, we send a letter home, and then that opens the conversation.
Right.
We didn't always do that. I think that's right.
Well, we should be contacting.
But, yeah.
And I believe we are. I mean, it's
But some people are
clearly
not,
there's
but
some
that's
things
what I'm
that's not
hearing, is
happening.
that we're not.
Well, so we need to review that and make sure we, so I think we all
Noted.
need to do it.
Yeah.
Like, and
I know, it just felt like there was like a lot of talking around the issue and it's not happening. And-
Right,
And Dr.
so-
Sullivan and Dr. Sullins thought it wasn't be happening and it was announced it would be happening, so.
Right, so I think we need to, at the building
Yeah.
level, make sure this is happening,
Yeah.
because I'm getting texts saying that it is some, and to your point, consistency is necessary, right? So
Yeah.
some buildings it's not happening, we need to make sure across the board it's happening in the same way at the same time, especially initially.
Yeah.
So let's make sure that happens, right? We can just do that, we just need to do it, so, but just procedural remarks, I'm getting anxious because I put a time limit on this meeting, and I want to make sure that we get to everyone's questions. So I think it's morphed into a situation where everyone's asking questions as we approach new topics, and that's great. So I want to make sure everyone at home feels that that's the right way to go. You see Q&A on the agenda. Make sure you ask your questions as we go. That said, there may be some questions that aren't related to topics that we're covering during the presentation. So I do want to try and make sure we just keep this streamlined so that we do have some time available at the end of this. It's going well so far, so I mean, we will, I think, do it again. It's important, but let's just keep moving. So, but if you're at home, ask your question anytime you want, because I know that people in the audience here are, and that's great. That's what we want.
All right, I'll keep moving.
No, I mean, I'm not trying to like criticize. I'm just,
No.
it's not you. It's everyone. Like, we're joining in. Initially, we weren't planning on doing questions and stuff, so it you know, makes the presentation longer. So I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to be critical of you.
No, not at all. Right. So, a little bit of a fleshed out description here. We talked about accommodations and a 504 plan, and we talked about specialized instruction and an IEP. So accommodations are the alteration of the environment, the curriculum format, or equipment that would allow a student with a disability to gain access to content and or complete tasks. The difference in specialized instruction is that specialized instruction is the individualized, organized, and planned instructional activity that specifically addresses the student's needs as expressed in the IEP goals and objectives, and/or modifies the content, the methodology, or the delivery of that instruction. So that is the big difference between those two. A couple of surveys that we did. There were surveys that came out through our tiered focus monitoring. There were also surveys this year that came out through our specialized reading independent evaluation. And then there were, and continue to be, the IEP parent surveys that come back or get sent out with every IEP and sometimes come back. So our tiered focus monitoring, when Julie Evans came from DESE, a survey went out to the families of students on IEPs, and she had a 32% return on those. And a synopsis of her surveys said that between 90 and 100% of families agreed that their school welcomes all families, that they are included as part of the IEP team, and that students are able to participate in any school program. 80 to 89% of the returns, those families agreed that the school values their input, that inclusion services support the educational needs, and that progress is made toward IEP goals. 70 to 79% of families agreed that related services support educational needs, that the evaluation process adequately assesses needs, and that transition services support needs. And I apologize for the comment at the end of the last needs. For some reason, I could not get it out of it, but that is the end. So this shows you some of what we want to focus on, which matches some of the areas that we heard need a focus as we move forward in student services and as a district overall. That we need to make sure that services really support students' needs, that people understand the evaluation progress and that it adequately addresses and assesses all needs, and that vertical alignment and those transition services really do happen and support the kids' needs as they move. And those are definite areas of focus for us.
But just to clarify on that
Yes.
survey, 32% return, was that the population it was sent out to was about the all students and families on IEPs, so we're looking at 15% of the district?
It was all of the families of students on IEPs, and within that, the 32%.
So it's quite a small pool.
32%, 15%.
Yeah. I just want to understand what the sample
About
size is.
5%.
Yeah.
What, about 5%? I don't know.
We can't, Lance. That's the problem.
There was also a very targeted survey because this was looking at specialized reading, that is, students on IEPs who had goals and objectives in that area. She came out to, she said about 66 families, and she got a 20% return on those. Communication was noted as a strength, with positive reports about regular communication with teachers. There were positive reports around detailed reports and progress monitoring. There were some concerns around data and, adequate numbers, true data in the progress monitoring. And, that too is something that I think is a familiar theme that we have heard and an area of focus for us. There were some questions around the IEP process in terms of the parent's role in the IEP, the understanding the process, and the development of the services delivery. So again, not new themes for us, focus areas for us, and I guess hearing these themes repeated in kind of these cohesive areas that we're hearing from Cpac, we're hearing it from within, we're hearing it from the outside. That consistency is kind of encouraging in a way, because it really shows us that we all really are seeing these same themes and these same common areas that we can really focus on in terms of clarifying, improving areas for growth. And then the survey feedback from IEP meetings. Now, as Cassie noted a few times, I present these in a monthly way, and this data is really appreciated. What I do in a monthly way is I really look at within that month, what kind of feedback are we getting? What this particular slide shows you instead is that September until April survey. So I looked at them over that span of time and distilled them that way instead of on a month-by-month basis. So what you can see is there are 5 major categories in those IEP surveys that go out to parents. That one of them is the school's efforts to partner with families. 97% agreement, either strongly agree or agree that that in fact does happen. That is a very positive thing, that schools do effort to partner with families. 3% disagreed or strongly disagreed in terms of that happening. And I know in school committee meetings, I have often shared some of those, if there are any particular feedback comments, which I think is very important, and I will continue to do, because it's only from those areas of disagreement that we really grow. In terms of partnering with teachers and administrators, 90% positively, strongly agreed or agreed. 4% disagreed that there was good progress partnering going on with teachers and administrators. In terms of school and communication, 95% strongly agreed or agreed that that communication was going on effectively, and 5% disagreed or strongly disagreed. In terms of the questions that show whether or not there is a helpful impact of special education services on the family, 96% positively, strongly agreed or agreed, and 4% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And in terms of parent participation, 100% agreed that that happened. So if we look within those surveys, the feedback for areas of growth, what we're hearing, and I think we're hearing it also from within and from Cpac, is that there needs to be some increased clarity on data around how progress is being monitored and reported on. In terms of the process, there really needs to be a slowdown, if you will, and a deeper explanation of the testing, the IEP process, and how decisions are made around service delivery. And in terms of the process, questions around that parent role in the development of the IEP.
Now, Mtss Process include identification.
Yes. Yes. And in terms of each of these areas, kind of what to do next. Some thoughts around this, and these are kind of beginning thoughts, but around that piece around data. Some consistent and clear language in annual goals that really truly shows how will we know that the student has achieved this goal and the tools being used so that everyone is very clear on those tools and how that is being monitored and how that has come up. In terms of the process, something as simple as agendas in meetings might be very helpful to show where are we at in this meeting, where are we going. It's very emotional and anxiety provoking for parents to be in meetings. And sometimes parents, I think, are so focused on the 1 or 2 things that they're really worried about and are so afraid that we're not going to get there in the meeting or that's not going to be addressed, that sometimes it's hard to hear a lot of that other stuff that's going on in the meeting. I think an agenda showing that in fact we are going to get there, when and how we're going to get there, would really be helpful. And I also think that real clear, bright line tying those decisions around service delivery to the testing and to the classroom performance to directly show those connections would be very helpful in meetings. I think sometimes this goes on. I think that it can kind of go on in a more robust way and in every meeting instead of just targeted meetings.
And which meetings are these, the individualized meetings?
Yes, these would be the IEP meetings.
So why, I guess on the and sorry if this is a silly question, but the agenda's question. If you have parents that are worried about a specific issue and are anxious about a specific, why would you start with that issue?
Because there is a process in an IEP meeting that you truly do need to go through, and the IEP carries you through that process. And there are important reasons that you go through that process because it builds on each other. So if you can't kind of really start in kind of one place and then go back to the beginning and go through the process and lead up to that place again.
But I guess what they were really saying, are there concerns you have? Okay, you have this concern, we're going to go through a process, we will get there, as opposed to just having an agenda and having people, have to read it and get anxious about it, just have them lead off of what they're concerned about.
So-
Say, we are going to talk about that.
Yes.
Let's talk about these things first.
We actually do start every single IEP meeting with parent concerns.
Okay.
It's a built-in part of the IEP and of that process. And we do talk about that we're going, what we're going to do and how we're going to get there in the meeting. I think having a visual in front of parents is important and helpful as
Yeah,
well,
well, I'm
because
not-
I think you get in the weeds in the meeting. And, certainly you can tell, but I think when you're in a meeting, you kind of get in the weeds in that meeting, it can lose some of that.
Well, I check off our agenda, it's very important.
And
Yes.
this agenda would be shared ahead of time, right? So like when I brought this up when you were presenting a couple months ago, it was the point. The point that I was making was
Yes.
you get to prepare and make notes to yourself because it is hard
It
in the
is.
moment
It
to process what's going on.
I think.
And I've been on both sides of that table, and it is hard.
It is normally the day of.
I feel like you get the agenda the day of, yeah, you do. When you sit down.
When you sit down,
Yes.
it's not.
So what I'm saying is, can it be sent in advance? Because as a meeting attendee, for any
Yes.
meeting, it's frankly not worth me being there if I haven't had an agenda in advance.
Seems like it'd be objectively helpful.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Right.
Like I said 2 months ago when I brought this up. So
I would just say also, sometimes to the point of not really understanding some of the language,
Yes.
if the agenda can be kind of
A
have
glossary
a
attached
crosswalk
to
to
it.
parents lingo or some way to just sort of understand. That's
Absolutely.
where I,
We don't need to use EduSpeak all the way through the agenda and the meeting. You're absolutely right. If we can make it kind of friendlier in terms of that, that would be really helpful.
I think one of the other pieces we hear sometimes from parents, especially going through it the first time, is the school has the data and the reports, and the parents don't receive those until right before the meeting.
So all of the reports go out for me 2 days ahead of the meeting.
2 days, yes, but
Yes.
when you're reading through a 20-page report with lingo you don't understand.
Right.
And, add this to the emotion of your child may or may not have been struggling for a long period of time. 2 days is a very short amount of time for working parents and families who are juggling other responsibilities. It does add to the level of stress coming into this meeting. And it's difficult to digest that as a informed parent who understands that language. But if you are new to that process, that's one area, I personally have always found to be just a bit silly because you want everyone to be an active team member, but only the parent doesn't have access to that document until the end. Everyone else has seen it before or
Miss-
has access.
Ms.
So
Shaw,
I-
are there any
I-
obstacles to providing it earlier or?
There can be, because we have timeframes within which to conduct testing and then timeframes within which to write the report and have the meeting. So what special ed guidelines and law says is that parents may have access to the reports 2 days ahead of time. We make sure that we send out those reports to all parents 2 days ahead of time, whether or not they ask for it. Law actually says that they need to ask for it, but we don't wait for that. Sometimes we are up against a deadline and we can't provide it more than 2 days ahead of time. So I can't make a blanket statement, given our timeframes, that they can be made 5 days ahead of time, for
You hear the
example.
concern.
Hmm?
We hear the concern about it.
But we do hear the concern, yes. The other thing that
Maybe
is
can I
important
just-
about the testing is that it can be really hard to digest. I think our school psychologists do a wonderful job, as do our therapists who conduct the testing, of really walking the families through the testing and explaining it very well in the meeting in a way that makes it very understandable, that sometimes reading it on your own is almost more anxiety provoking. And like I said, I've kind of sat on both sides of the table and found that to be the case. I'm not saying that we don't want to provide it ahead of time because of that or anything, but I'm just saying that there is another piece to this.
Well, that was,
what
that
I-
was the question you asked, just to make sure. Yeah.
Right. What I would say is that, you know, we will always provide them 2 days ahead of time. Some days, if we can provide them even early, in some cases, if we can provide them even earlier than that, you know, will we look at that? We will look at that.
Okay.
I have just one, there was a question from before, it's Carrie, I did ask, if Carrie, if you could send your full name and address, that would be helpful. The question is, may I ask, when do the surveys get sent out and how do they get sent out? I don't know if that means the IEP surveys, I guess I'm assuming, but.
So the IEP surveys go home with every IEP that leaves the district.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
With the reports, obviously you're sending home paper copy in the mail or in a packet, or no? What is it, digital? Okay, so that's just emailed home?
2 days before the meeting.
Can a paper copy be sent home? Is it just me? I'm like, I have always, in every meeting I've been in as a teacher, and it's not in this district because I don't teach in this district, but there's a paper copy, right?
Yeah, it's usually.
I'm just imposing my processing process on other people, but like, digital
other
doesn't
people
help me,
say
and my printer doesn't work at home, so.
That's healthy.
And I have to
Like,
say,
I would need a printed copy.
we hear
and I
from
think more time.
families,
Yeah.
sometimes how they want to receive
Yeah,
things,
can
and
you
we
do
always on
both? Yeah.
But I also don't think sometimes parents, when they're new to the system, they don't realize, maybe to Kristen's point, that they're not actually going to receive this until the very end.
Yeah,
You know, like you think, well, the testing's been done, great, I can look through it and see, and then we schedule this meeting, but no, it's, you know, you're waiting until that very end, and then you're digesting the information and meeting to determine eligibility all in one fell swoop. So it
That's
is,
good feedback, because we can, you know, think about that in our communication, you know, in more that I'm sure they get that in their rights, you know,
Yes.
parental
Yeah.
rights that they get,
That's a
but
lot
that's,
to read
It is a
through.
lot.
but that's a lot of stuff.
Because I was
though, so.
thinking like, being on the school side of things, pulling kids and fitting in all the testing, like, is that gonna run right down to the wire? And I'm sure you really got it, because your kids are coming in reporting to you when they weren't in math class or whatever. But, I understand the limitation, but I feel like, I don't know, if it's something to be done a little more proactively and just say like, you know what? Just call them more frequently and like get this report done earlier and.
Maybe you should explore what could we do more in advance without impeding the process? What, you know, are the raw results we could send? I just, it is just to think outside the box what we could do too, because this concern, this isn't the first time we've heard it.
Mhm.
And I can understand it and relate as a parent that you want to get things in advance, be able to process it, have the same information. There's an asymmetry involved here that you feel behind when you're going in with an expert and you've got data, you don't know how to interpret it, and so I don't know what the answer is, and maybe the answer is a better story as to here's what the package is going to be and why it's more effective for you to get it 2 days before as opposed to a week before. Maybe it's, we can provide you this, this, and this in advance, maybe it's a better packaging, maybe more friendly, but I think it's worth thinking about in one of our, you know, next several months, thinking about ways to make that process.
I do think what's also really important, though, is to remember that it is a full team process. And so people aren't, you know, kind of operating in silos. And that you come to the IEP team to kind of hear these results of this test and these tests. And that a lot of times when you are in a meeting, the therapists and the school psychologists and the teachers, they are going to be talking about how their tests and the results of their tests interact and support and corroborate each other in the classroom. And that's really important because that's the really full picture of the child. And And, you know, I understand that it's a lot to receive at once. And that, you know, there are guidelines and timelines around it. And, you know, I really hear and appreciate, you know, parents' concerns around that. I think it will be very important to kind of share those timing expectations with families and also share with them that, you know, they don't have to feel like they fully digested and understood the whole thing, that we're here to work with you as a team and help you digest this. And
we're trying to meet our deadlines too. And that's, but we hear the concern. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're obviously, you know, talking about the big picture and there's a lot of pieces to it. But just to note, so everybody hears that,
Yes.
we hear the concern and we will look to see what we can do to, A, communicate, first of all, what the timeline is. And then to B, to try to work with families to get information to you in a more expedient way if possible, based on our timelines. I do understand where, you know, Mrs. Sawanka is coming from too, but in no way, and I don't want to speak for it, but I'm just, for the district, do we want to make it seem like we're not hearing this and trying to get it?
So I saw there's a parent that had their hand raised in the back. And then I saw you too. I just didn't know who raised their hand first. So you'll be next.
Sarah Davis, on 160 Farrows Lane. I just had an idea listening to this. And much like you, Barbara, I've sat on both sides of the table, and it's a lot more daunting to be on the other side of the table. I learned after all those years on your side. But I was thinking that if maybe Cpac and Student Services could maybe get together and come up with some kind of like, almost like a little Cliff Notes version of like,
What to
in the big
expect.
of your, like in the front of your giant packet that you get on like day one, like, it's just like, here's how it works. I got your form. I have 5 days to respond. I did my 5 days. 10 days from now, if you have your own testing, you're entitled to a meeting, you know, more 30 days after that. So like, I mean, just like.
So more
step by
bulleted
step.
version of the rules.
Like, exactly.
Of parent
And
rules
like
and
down
regs.
at the end, you're like,
Which you
and
do
you're
get.
gonna get your testing 2 days before.
Yeah.
Just so you know, if you want to meet with a CPAC mentor, who can go through
It's more
your,
digestible
I,
organization.
like go through the testing with you and read through it with you. Like I've read other people's testing.
Yep.
To kind of help them, because it's like
Mhm.
reading French and
Yes.
notating French. And, you know, so giving people the options, but just that one page, because nobody's reading.
Like a cheat
Like
sheet.
totally like a cheat
Nobody's
sheet.
reading.
Or-
No,
or-
it's not in advance, no.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if nobody's reading it, they're like, great. I don't understand what any of this is. And I'm even cry. So, but if they at least had that, you know, and they knew there was somebody there from the beginning, and there's your intro to CPAC right there. But I'm sure you could get a team together to make something like that and just make everybody's lives less stressful.
Are you saying send it at the beginning of like the IEP process or to like everyone at the beginning of the year?
Probably, well, I guess whoever's going through the process, like when you get it, you're like, you get that, you hand in your letter, right? I mean, people don't even know they have to write a letter. I've been here.
That's
You
the part, I like,
know, like,
you
don't
don't
say
say
that
that
while
you
they're
can do
kids
it,
testing.
so you have to do it, and then you have to learn while you're doing it.
Yeah,
It's a
you
hard
don't-
part of special ed.
Yeah, like I'm still
And I
learning
hope
things.
you speak on my basic rights to,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like I'm trying to preach it to the choir because I.
It is, because you don't know that you need to know it unless you already know it.
That's the definition of special education services. You don't know what you need to know until somebody says you, and it's usually too late. So if we could maybe do it prior and, you know, give people like a little confidence,
Mhm.
you know,
And maybe, like you said, that initial evaluation request,
that's when you get
you that can get.
that
Yep.
sheet.
Yeah, when you're in such test.
Right.
I think this just goes back to that question too, is which districts are doing this really well and what does that look like?
So, Ms. Mayor, can I just?
Yeah, can I just
I'm
add?
sorry, I just want to.
23 Summer Street, just a process question. As you were describing, the question came up, do you all meet before you sit down with us parents within and look at the IEP? Or is that all, everyone's first opportunity to come together and discuss?
That is everyone's first opportunity to come together and discuss what to do. Now, when testing comes out, do sometimes members of the team consult with each other on the testing and what they've seen and other common themes and things like that? Yes, sometimes that will go on, so that, you know, the speech pathologist knows what, is being seen in terms of, sometimes they're working memory tests are the same as the school psychologists and things like that, or sometimes they have similar tests to, what's going on with the reading tests and things like that. So they will look at each other's tests and sometimes look at that. But in terms of truly being a team and coming together for the IEP, that's the first.
I have a couple of comments or questions
Great.
here.
Yeah,
So we have Melissa McDonough. Melissa is from 306 Fair Oaks Lane. It would be beneficial to families that are new to the process and maybe all families to understand service delivery better, how much time, days for service is sufficient versus too much. Are there guidelines that the district uses to assign delivery times? And then, I think, are you just taking the information?
I am at this point.
Okay, yeah, I know, we're looking at time. And then Jenny Leclerc, sorry about that, from 82 Pond Street. So she says, absolutely any business meeting or school committee meeting, you would receive an agenda a week in advance or reports a week in advance, especially with these complex reports where second opinions and additional research is research to prepare for these meetings when we are not fluent or educated in the field to the extent of the others in the room. And an electronic copy is helpful for sharing with tutors and other outside experts. And then Carrie did give us her address. Her son's address is 134 is that. So it's Carrie DeRoche, DER.
130.
Correct. Thank you.
Mrs. Frazier.
Hi, I'm Beth Frazier. Some of you I've only seen on Zoom. It's nice to meet you. At 27 Lindy Hill Road, and I was listening to the meeting before I got here on the way from work. But I do have a series of comments that I put on a deposit slip that I was as I was listening to the meeting. So I just wanted to provide some of the feedback to you guys because I think it's helpful. It's not really, maybe there's a question here, but it was more just my experience in going through the IEP process several times with several different children who have specific learning disabilities like that SLD. So the first thing I want to talk about was the MTSS process, just to go back because I wasn't here, so I couldn't say my thoughts on this one. But I think it's misleading to say that there's like a 4 or 6 week timeline. And I think that the timeline should be a focus in terms of next steps, because how long are they in this tier? And I know it's like, oh, it's different for everybody. It isn't really, because you don't want to get stuck in tier 1 like my oldest was for like several years, where as a parent, since you're not part of MTSS, you don't know that they're really not making any progress. And if it's this new thing that you're calling it, but you had it before, or whatever, but I forget the old RTI, then maybe that could be like one of the focus points is that timeline.
Yes.
And that providing updates to parents every 4 weeks on what they're doing specifically, because then you don't have those early intervention kids getting kind of stuck in 3rd grade, like still not, oh gosh, they're struggling. And now they're having emotional problems on top of it, because then they feel like they're stupid at that point. If they're not getting those targeted interventions that the IEP plan provides. Whereas the MTSS doesn't have accommodations. They only have what Patrick described earlier, which was, hey, maybe we're all going to do our homework together here. Like it's not anything specific for anyone.
That was just a general tier
No,
one.
but that is what it is. That is what it is. Like you actually described it pretty well, because it's very, very general. It's going on in the classroom, and it's not anyone pulled out and like, okay, let's do some math facts together, or pulled out and like, can you read this paragraph to me? That only happens in IEPs. Okay, so that was my comment on MTSS.
And I like the time frame idea, and I also like the time frame idea, like, following at the end of a meeting, having a good action plan. Who's going to do what? When are we going to come back together? So it's all really clear.
Yeah, and like I still, as somebody who my child went through MTSS, I still don't know what the tiers are, and I don't know what that looks like because it's all like within the school. So I'm like very well educated about all this stuff, and I still don't know like what is tier 2, like what's tier 3, like when is that? Like what is like my youngest? I was like, what's he in? What is that? And then how long is he there? Until he goes to something else. And And it's not that I don't feel like those, like, as you described, educators, teachers, principal, I think they are working together. I think they are sitting down and talking about these kids. But I'm wondering, like, how is that being reported back to the parent? And what is the next step for this kid? Like, what is their path? And it's not defined. So I think a defined path and a timeline. That was my feedback on it. The other thing that I found kind of unfortunate about this meeting was that the principals are not involved at all, because the principals play a huge role, and no one has really kind of touched on that yet in our meeting, but the principals are part of MTSS, but the principals are not even remotely involved unless specifically requested in the IEP process. So there's a big disconnect there, right? So there's no, like, the MTSS data is like completely separate from the IEP. And I feel like the principal, like, could be the link between the two. If we were somehow able to get the principal to help us in the process between those two things, that would be a big game changer, because the principal is ultimately the person that I need to go to oftentimes, because the special education, the special educators that are doing that targeted intervention, and the ESPs, like the aides in the classroom, even the classroom teachers, all those people answer to the principal, but there's no principal here, right? So they all go back to the if I have an issue, I have to go to the principal about it, because I like, you're not really in the school, and a lot of these things are like school-based problems, or like missed service, or whatever it is, like heavy absences of the special education, or like my thing was cut, like whatever their issue is, it always goes back to the principal, and then they're kind of like, I don't really know about the IEPs, or like, I'm not really in special education. So there's that. I feel like they could get more educated and maybe be a link between those two processes.
Yes.
Just generally speaking, MTSS and IEP. That's my feedback on that one.
And they should link, because all of that MTSS data is very important kind of pre-referral
is.
data for the IEC.
Yes,
Yes.
and it would be helpful to have it communicated,
Yeah.
like, to the parent and then to the rest of the IEP team, I think, as well. And then early intervention, I think you guys talked about how important early intervention is. And for someone that goes into the middle school, for example, by the time you get there, you really honestly don't have a lot of time for services. Like, you don't have time for pullouts. You don't have time for those math fact things. Like, there's more time when you just have the one classroom in Osgood and Deer Hill. But when you get to 6th grade and you start switching from this class, like, when are you going to do it? Oh, utility. Well, okay, utility, we're all doing our homework together then. So when can I do it then? Then they all are super busy with after school activities. So like, they're going to baseball, lacrosse, all these things. And it's just too late then for them to really get the help. So I'm so glad that you guys are having this discussion now. Like, this whole presentation has been excellent. And I think if people are able to kind of work to get it better in the elementary school level, then it would be more helpful to those kids that have been kind of a little bit left behind with the never being identified as having an actual problem or anything. And to that point, I've always said this, but the middle school is awesome, even though it's hard to do the pullouts because they don't have the time. But the 6th grade team has been absolutely like amazing. So all around on all levels, like the principal, the teachers, the communication between them and the special ed. And I do feel it would be helpful if you had them as a model for the rest of the district on how they communicate with each other, and what are they doing that makes it so successful after all these years where there wasn't a lot of success between how people communicated. Like, is it all just John Mills? Is it? I don't know. Who's doing it? So maybe like someone could look at that and say, I don't know whether it's you, Barbara, because you're in student services, to say, okay, what's up with the 6th grade team? How can we get the other teams to like work together in the same way where they're communicating about
That's that
this one child?
consistency piece.
You know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
do.
Plug for the 8th grade team too.
Oh, good. That's something to look forward to. That's something to look forward to. But the, like, those final things that I had were about the data and like the Dr. Scollins and your thoughts on like these progress reports and the consistency and the iAlready data and the unit assessments and all those things and how they play into like the IEP and decisions that people make about special education. My concern with that is like, I understand like the iReady specifically is new, but I'm worried about, you know, it doesn't really have to be, I know there's like consistency, but it doesn't have to be consistent. Obviously with different teachers, you're gonna have different ways of reporting things. And I'm glad that the iReady is kind of like a blanket across the board. How does this child compare to somebody else? But I also felt like when I was in all of my conferences, they kind of downplayed the iReady across the board. All the teachers seem to have the same response, which I don't know whether it came from you guys for them to respond that way, but they said, iReady, oh, well, it's new and with this, you shouldn't really look at this because it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, but they're failing. Like that's a real thing. And then I feel like that is an actual piece of data that you have, even though like we don't know how to decipher it. I had it completely downplayed in all of my spring conferences, and I found that surprising.
Yeah, you know, we did talk to the teachers about, you know, this is something new, and that's why originally we weren't going to share it out. Most districts weren't even sharing out the family reports or any
Not
of
the
it.
first time through.
Not the first year because it's so new and they just don't.
But we felt
teachers
like,
really don't
we
know
felt like
about
it was still useful in some way.
Yeah, and then in the family reports, we thought were pretty good, that they at least gave some idea, but the teachers haven't had as much experience with it. Plus, we're trying to figure it out, you know, we're trying to look for trends and patterns. Kind of hard, we've only done it 2 times, so then we have the 3rd time. We need to, there's pieces around just even rolling out the implementation. You know, like how long does it take a student to take it? How long do you wait for the student to take it? Do you let them take it 3 times in a row, like 3 sessions? Like what are all those things? So there's some inconsistencies just based on the fact that it's a new rollout. So once you practice
But
it
still
for a
helpful,
year.
because they still fail, right?
So-
That's still information that they're not passing, even if they did it 3 times.
But it is very true, though, that the rollout and the comfort level and watching it and students also taking it more than once, it is a little bit of a game changer, because if you're as old as I am and you remember when MCAS was new, the first year or 2 of MCAS was exactly like that. And it was just like a nightmare. The teachers were like, oh my God, we don't know how to administer this. And the kids, it was such a new experience for the kids to take it and all of that kind of stuff. And it took a little bit of like, you know, you had to go through it a little bit before you really felt like, okay, we've all got this. And now I feel like, you know, this is really starting to be an accurate reflection of what it really is.
Yeah, it's just like, it felt like, as a parent, there was a lot of sweeping it under the rug, even though it was actual information about them
Yeah, it
failing.
doesn't, we're looking at it. So it's
Yeah.
not like we're not looking at it, but I can see why.
Yeah, 'cause
teachers would
it's
do
like
that,
it
they
is-
haven't had enough time to talk about it
Yeah,
with us.
because
also.
I've been on the other end of that where the data, like, say you passed 1 test, and they're like, look at this though, you passed.
Well, that was why one of the reasons we shared is we didn't want you to think
Yeah.
that we wouldn't sweep it,
Right,
we
yeah,
wanted you to
right,
have it. It's
Yeah,
just-
that's good.
Right.
That's good, because I think it was important. I'm glad I got it. It was just kind of the reaction to it, because I think going with all the services in place and then had going down, like from how we were in the beginning.
But there are
how
some
you were
interesting,
this spring.
but those are some interesting things we're looking at, because there is some kind of interesting pieces around when you gave it and the norms that they use, because the norms are based on the iReady, the people that took the iReady, they're not national norms, there's like just a lot of things that we're trying to learn, because we do have that question.
That's
Because we're like, well, wait a minute. And also, if
Maybe it
it
gets
started up
harder.
high, there was so much to it, so I completely understand where you're
Does it
coming
get
from.
harder because it's the end of the grade year? Like,
Well,
So just let everyone know, you got like 3 minutes left.
I know, and I have
Round
2
it up to
more,
5.
I know, and I have one more
Just so,
comment,
yeah,
but it does, well, it's adaptive, so it will, but it's really based on the student. So it is adaptive, so it will go to them, but it does start them at a certain place. But happy to talk about,
yeah,
what can we call it? Happy to
no,
talk
thank you
about
for
it.
sending them home.
Yeah, so
honestly.
you can, yeah, I think after the end of this year, when we have time to look at the 3 times that we've given it, we can look at patterns, because we were calling iReady and please talk us through this too, because I don't understand why we're seeing some of this. And some of it was our kids came in really high, and their growth was low. We're like, wait a minute, but they're still okay. Anyway, those are things we're trying to figure out. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I can understand why you were saying that. I do have another, it says to wait till the very end. Are we there?
We're pretty much there.
Okay.
I just wonder, Mr. Sawanka, are there any really important things that you want to just get to
So
in
I
your
think
community?
I'm
that you-
just going to finish this screen
Okay.
if I could.
Yep.
And then I'll be back in school committee on June 8th.
Yes,
And we're pretty, you can find us. pretty easy.
okay.
Like, so you can definitely, if you're out there and you have questions, yeah.
Well, and obviously, I think I think everyone in this room would agree that this was actually a valuable discussion, so we'll do
It
it
was
again.
helpful for us.
I mean, I think we'll do it again. I think it was worthwhile. We had to see if it was worthwhile. I think it is. So we'll do it again, but, so are you?
So I would
you
like
wanna
to finish
this?
the
Okay,
screen and
okay.
then I'm going to explain.
Then we'll do the
to you
last
what I'm
comment.
going to Finish in the school committee meeting in June.
Okay,
So the very last process box there, the kind of area for growth was parent role in the development of the IEP. So in terms of the IEP, parents share their parent concerns. Like I said earlier, Mr. Dial, it's the very beginning of the IEP process. It's kind of what drives all of it. Parents share the presentation of the child at home, and that's really important because oftentimes there's a presentation at school, there's a presentation at home. And we need to know that to make that connection. And then the parents contribute to the vision for the student with the team. It's not a parent or a family vision and a school vision. It is kind of one vision of where we want the child to go. And that's kind of like, you know, that really important piece to the IEP process. What is coming up, which I will, and it's kind of like some of the really important good stuff. So I want everybody to tune back in to the next school committee meeting so we can get to it. Is we will
next
go
January,
Two
June.
from now.
June.
January.
my next one. Talk a little bit about the IEP process itself. Also, talk you through my student services website, and actually I have an embedded link there so I can bring you and show you what's there. Because a lot of times I hear two things. I hear that, you know, parents don't know that it's there, but then I also hear that sometimes, and I literally take phone calls about this in my office, parents will say to me, I'm in the website and I'm really confused. Can you just talk me through this? Because there's so much here. And I say, of course I can. So that's a really, you know, important piece, that individual connection with families. I always value that, but if I can kind of walk you through some of that website and show you what some of that information is and what it tells you. And then take a look at some of the qualifications for special education, the categories and information about qualifying and what it means. And then really, where are we going next? You know, we've got these areas that we want for growth. We've got some of these, you know, areas of, you know, some real strength and some opportunities. And how are we going to capitalize on those? And where are we going to go? So that I really can do in the next school committee meeting that I am present in, as well as kind of give my end of the year report.
In January.
Which
So
is this again?
let's, I just want to go to that comment, we're almost there. And by the way, if anyone see me texting, it's parents. It's not, I'm not talking about where I'm going this week.
You're texting your parents?
No, not my parents.
I don't-
Parents, other
May I
parents.
say one thing after that? Peggy?
Sure,
Ooh, I like that.
Sure.
Power move.
As the only woman on school committee, I'm making the move.
I like
Yeah.
So Megan Berry from 11 Tad Lane. Are there any planned modifications or additional enrichment in kindergarten curriculum for incoming preschoolers, particularly for speech? These incoming students have missed a significant portion of their preschool experience due to COVID shutdown and have been in a masked classroom setting in critical years for their speech development, or incoming kindergartens.
I'm sorry, can you read that one more time?
Sure,
for me?
yeah,
There's a
I
lot
actually was
there.
gonna actually even say Ms. Berry should call us, or speak to the principal. Are there any planned modifications or additional enrichment in the kindergarten curriculum for incoming preschool or incoming kindergartners, what you want to do, particularly for speech? These incoming students have missed a significant portion of their preschool experience due to COVID shutdown
Mhm.
and have been in mass classroom
Mhm.
settings in critical years for their speech development. I would say, yes, we did it this year and we'll continue to do it because we meet students where they are.
Exactly.
And so we definitely had to think about who are the children in the seats in front of us when they have not had any school experiences. So even simple behavior things we had to work on. So yes, to answer that, yes. Are there specifics? I can't really give those because it's really based on the students that come in front of us, but happy to have further conversation. Gary wants to call you.
Yes, or even
The principal,
principal.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, you want to bring it home, Mrs. St. Ange?
Yeah, I'm curious how the MTSS process and child study process is linked to Aspen and DCAPS as well, just because I know like if a child has an IEP or 504, there's a little thing that pops up and I as a teacher can, if I have access, can see that. I'm wondering how it's indicated in Aspen if a child has been a part of the process, because sometimes, like in my experience, I'll be working with a 5th grader who's struggling to read. Jeepers, whoa, how has this kid gotten so far? And then you realize, oh, their 2nd grade teacher actually brought them up for child study, and then whatever happened. And again, this is in a different district, but I think that pattern can be seen anywhere. And no one, and we're even K through 5 in the same school, but like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that they'd already been brought up. So I'm wondering if it's already happening or how it can be indicated in Aspen so that that follows the child, so that at each grade level, or in, God forbid, 6th or 8th grade, if someone has a concern, they say, oh, this child had been a part of reading intervention or math intervention, and they kind of passed out of it or went back to tier 1 from tier 2. I just think there needs to be something, not just, a transition meeting between grade levels, but something that's formally documented so that we can keep track. We being the teachers who are working with these kids, and then we know what they've experienced so far, what's been done. I mean, it doesn't need to be a blow by blow every time they've seen a reading specialist or whatever, but
There should be just some record that they were even seen
Yeah.
by the reading.
it just feels like if there's an MTSS tab in Aspen, I don't know, does that exist?
Yeah, and that is one of the conversations that we've been having around MTSS, not just kind of going to and being kept on and transitioning kind of through, Google Forms that the schools are
Right.
using, so they go from, one
Yeah.
level to another, but also, is there a way to incorporate this into Aspen in a much more abbreviated way? And I know that there's like a journal tab there and things like that, where
Yeah.
you can note things. But that is one of the conversations that we're having in our subcommittee, if you will.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna be that guy. We gotta walk down. Keeps on going. So we gotta shut it down. So I want to thank everyone for coming. This was really, really worthwhile and valuable. But I gotta stick to the time frame that we set out. Okay, so I guess, do we need a motion to adjourn perhaps? Because we did call it to order.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Dials, second.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. St. Ange. All in favor, aye. All opposed. Motion- The meeting's adjourned. Student service forms adjourned. Thank you all so much. Thank you guys. Thank you, Cpac. Thanks
for
to all the
coming.
parents for coming.
Thank you.
Great.
Such the
Thanks
most
for being
in-person,
here.
very
Yeah.
nice.
Participants we've had.
Wow,
Any
this crowd.
Great.
Great.